My appointment as the Cygnian Compact's ambassador to the Galactic Concordat was the culmination of my life's work. I, Kalen of the Third Echelon, had spent cycles studying the intricate dance of interstellar diplomacy, mastering the 97 dialects of the Concordat standard, and training the chromatic resonance of my skin to convey the most subtle nuances of Cygnian intent. Our people, the Cygnians, had evolved on a world of gentle giants and predictable seasons. Our society was built on the unshakable foundations of logic, consensus, and the quiet harmony of a species that had never known a true predator. Conflict, to us, was a failure of communication, a dissonance in the grand symphony of existence. And then there were the humans. They were the discord in that symphony, the unknown variable in every political and economic equation. They were latecomers to the galactic stage, a species that had burst forth from their solitary star system with a velocity that had left the elder races reeling. In the mere 2 centuries since their first contact, they had established themselves as a power to be reckoned with, yet no one seemed to agree on what precisely they were. My predecessor, the venerable Lyra, had left me with a trove of data logs, but her final report on humanity was less a summary and more a collection of paradoxes. "They are a species at war with itself," she had written, her own chromatic signature flickering with confusion in the recording. "And it is this internal conflict that makes them both the most dangerous and potentially the most valuable species we have ever encountered. I advise caution. I advise hope. I advise you to learn from my inability to reconcile the two." Following her cryptic advice, I dedicated my first lunar cycle on the Spire, the breathtaking crystalline needle of a station that housed the Concordat, to a singular purpose: understanding humanity. I scheduled informal nutrient-paced meetings with ambassadors from a dozen different species, seeking their perspectives. The results only deepened my anxiety. My first meeting was with Ambassador Zorgan of the Vexian swarm. The Vexians were a diminutive, insected race, their exoskeletons a dull, chitinous brown. They communicated in a series of rapid clicks and pheromonal bursts, which the universal translator struggled to render into coherent speech. Zorgan's private chamber was kept humid and dark, smelling of damp earth and decay. "Humans," he clicked, his antennae twitching violently. A puff of acrid fear pheromones hit me, and my own skin involuntarily shimmered with a pale, empathetic blue of unease. "You have not met them. Consider yourself fortunate, Ambassador Kalen. They are the silence that follows a scream." I shifted in my seat, the gel cushion molding uncomfortably around my lower limbs. "The official records speak of their military prowess, but the data is often redacted." Zorgan scurried to a console, his tiny manipulators flying across the keys. A holographic display flickered to life between us. It showed a debris field, the shattered husks of several dozen pirate vessels of Cathar design. "The ghost fleet of the Cygnus Arm," Zorgan chirped, his voice a low thrum of remembered terror. A pirate armada, led by a renegade Cathar warlord. They had plagued Vexian trade routes for a decade. The Cathar Dominion refused to intervene, citing internal politics. The Concordat fleet was too slow to mobilize. We were on the verge of economic collapse. We appealed to the humans for aid. "And they sent a fleet?" I asked, leaning forward, my optical sensors focusing on the wreckage. "They sent one ship," Zorgan corrected, and the fear scent intensified. "A vessel they called the Whispering Blade. It never fired a single kinetic weapon. It never launched a torpedo. We monitored the entire engagement. The pirate fleet, it just dismantled itself. Ships began firing on their own allies. Reactor cores were mysteriously overloaded from within their own engine rooms. Life support systems failed on the command ship, venting the bridge crew into the void. The Warlord, they found his body later. He had taken his own sidearm and ended his own life. The human ship just sat there, cloaked, watching. They are masters of a kind of warfare we cannot even comprehend. Not a war of steel, but of the mind. A war of ghosts and whispers. They did not defeat the pirates, Ambassador. They made the pirates defeat themselves. They are terrifying." I left Zorgan's chambers with my skin a turbulent pattern of deep violets and grays. The Vexian story painted a portrait of cold, calculating, and ruthlessly efficient warriors. It was a disturbing image, one that resonated with the darkest rumors I had heard. My next meeting, however, shattered that image completely. I met with Ambassador Illum of the Lumini, a being of pure, coherent light that inhabited a containment field of shimmering gold. The Lumini were an ancient, philosophical race, and our conversation took place in a chamber of absolute blackness, so her radiant form could be appreciated without distraction. Humanity. Her voice was like the chiming of crystal bells, a sound that resonated directly with the logic centers of my brain. It was a calming frequency. Ah, you seek to understand the children of paradox, a worthy and frustrating endeavor. Zorgan of the Vexians shared a disquieting military account, I said, my skin slowly settling into a more placid cerulean. Illum pulsed gently. Yes, the Vexians see the shadow. It is a very long shadow, I admit, but they fail to see the source of the light that casts it. 3 decades ago, our primary star, a G-type giant we call the Great Radiance, began to show signs of premature collapse. A cascade failure in its chromosphere threatened to send it supernova millennia ahead of schedule. Our own technology, based on gravitational manipulation, was useless. We could only observe our impending doom. She drifted closer, her light warming the air. We sent out a distress call on all frequencies, a requiem for our civilization. The elder races offered their condolences. The Cathar offered to sell us relocation passage at exorbitant rates. It was the humans who answered. They sent a scientific convoy they called Project Daybreak. For nearly 2 standard years, their finest minds worked alongside ours. Their engineers, their physicists, their astrophysicists, they were relentless. Did they do? I asked, captivated. They didn't try to stop the collapse. They knew they couldn't, Illum explained. Instead, they built a series of hyperscale resonance forks, trillions of them, seeded into the star's corona by automated drones. These forks were designed to alter the harmonic frequency of the collapsing stellar matter. They didn't halt the process, they retuned it. They turned a supernova into a controlled, sustained pulse, a slow burn that will now feed our worlds for another 100,000 years. They saved us, Ambassador Kalen. They asked for nothing in return. Their people worked themselves to the point of physical exhaustion, sustained by sheer will and a substance they call coffee. I saw them weep with joy when the final fork was activated. They feel empathy on a scale that is, frankly, illogical. They are builders and saviors of incomparable spirit. 2 meetings, 2 irreconcilable portraits. One of a silent, terrifying destroyer, the other of an empathetic, ingenious creator. How could one species contain both? My confusion only deepened when I spoke with Grax, a silicon-based life form from the crystalline hegemony. Grax did not speak in words, but in resonating fractal light patterns, which the translator rendered as dry, emotionless prose. Humans are an anomaly, the translator intoned, as Grax's crystalline body pulsed with complex geometric light. Their defining characteristic is contradiction. We have analyzed their cultural output. They have produced mathematical theorems of such elegance that they resemble divine art. They have composed symphonies that encode the very structure of the universe in their harmonies. We have witnessed a single human artist spend a lifetime carving a mountain into a monument of peace. Grax paused, and the light shifted to a jarring, discordant pattern. We have also analyzed their history. They are the only species we have encountered to develop weapons capable of sterilizing their own homeworld, and then to build thousands of them, pointing them at themselves. They have committed genocides against their own subspecies for reasons as trivial as minor differences in philosophy or skin pigmentation. They love with a ferocity that can build civilizations, and they hate with a passion that can burn them to the ground. They are not one thing, Ambassador. They are everything. They are the ultimate potential for both creation and destruction, encapsulated in fragile, carbon-based bodies. To deal with them is to deal with a probability storm. You may get a gentle shower, or you may get a galactic hurricane. There is often no way to know which is coming until it is upon you. I retreated to my own quarters after that, my mind a swirling vortex of conflicting data. My Cygnian brain, accustomed to linear logic and predictable outcomes, felt strained to the breaking point. How could a species be so different from one moment to the next? Were they driven by some inscrutable code? Was it a form of collective madness? My anxiety grew as the date of my first formal council meeting approached. It was a session to mediate a territorial dispute over the newly surveyed Serafina Vale, a nebula rich in exotic particles vital for next-generation faster-than-light travel. Two primary claimants had emerged, the Cathar Dominion and the Terran Alliance. It would be my first time in the same room as a human. It would be my first time witnessing their diplomacy in action. The days leading up to the meeting were tense. The corridors of the spire buzzed with speculation. The Cathar were posturing, as was their way. Their ambassador, Grathel, was a particularly odious example of his species. The Cathar were massive, bipedal creatures, a cross between reptile and insect, with thick, chitinous plates covering their muscular bodies. They had evolved as the apex predators on a brutal death world, and their culture reflected this. Strength, dominance, and overt aggression were the pillars of their society. Grathel was known for his bellowing voice, his casual threats, and his disdain for the softer protocols of diplomacy. He had made it clear in several public forums that he considered the human claim to be an insult, a joke from an upstart species that needed to be taught its place. I spent the night before the meeting in a state of deep meditation, attempting to calm the chaotic flickering of my skin. I reviewed the profiles of the human delegation. Their lead ambassador was a female named Eva Rostova. Her official biography was sparse. She had a background in xenoanthropology and crisis negotiation. There were no commendations for military service, no celebrated scientific achievements. She seemed ordinary, deceptively so. The photo attached to her file showed a creature with pale skin, dark hair pulled back from her face, and eyes that seemed to absorb the light around them. She was not physically imposing. She lacked the obvious menace of Grathel or the ethereal presence of a loom. She looked soft, fragile, and that, more than anything, is what terrified me. The grand chamber of the Concordat was an awe-inspiring space. It was a perfect sphere, with the central dais floating in the exact center, held aloft by gravitic projectors. The walls were a living star chart, displaying the entirety of the known galaxy in real time. Ambassadors from over 70 different species were present, each in their own environmental niche, observing the proceedings. The air hummed with the energy of a dozen different life support systems and the murmur of universal translators. I took my seat, my skin a carefully controlled, neutral silver gray, betraying none of the turmoil within. Across the circular dais, Grathel of the Cathar lounged in his oversized chair, his clawed fingers drumming impatiently on the metallic surface. His scent, a pungent mix of ozone and spiced meat, wafted across the chamber. He looked bored and arrogant, a predator waiting for the formality to end so the real business of intimidation could begin. Then the doors slid open with a soft hiss, and the human delegation entered. There were 3 of them. 2 male aides dressed in simple dark blue uniforms flanked the central figure. Ambassador Eva Rostova, she was exactly as her file had depicted her. Of average height for her species, her movements were economical and precise. She didn't stride with authority or scurry with subservience. She simply walked, a model of efficiency. Her face was calm, her expression unreadable. She took her seat directly opposite Grathel without giving him more than a passing glance. The quiet confidence she exuded was more unsettling than any overt display of power could have been. It was the calm of a deep ocean. You had no idea what lurked beneath the surface. The session was called to order by a neutral arbiter, a being of pure thought that communicated via telepathic projection. The initial pleasantries were exchanged, the procedural rules established. Then, the floor was given to the Cathar Dominion to state its claim. Grathel heaved himself to his full, intimidating height. His shadow fell across the central dais. His voice, amplified by the chamber's acoustics, was a guttural roar that vibrated in my very bones. "The Serafina Vale," he began, spitting the words out like curses, "lies adjacent to Cathar sovereign space. Our fleets have patrolled its borders for generations. It is ours by right of proximity, by right of might. It is ours because we are the Cathar, and our claim is backed by the most powerful armada in this quadrant." He turned his massive, reptilian head to fix his gaze on Ambassador Rostova. "And what is the counterclaim?" "A flimsy piece of digital paper from these newcomers. These humans, a species barely out of its planetary cradle, a soft-skinned, weak-boned race of talkers and tinkers who think their little survey ships give them the right to lay claim to a Cathar resource. He laughed, a harsh, grating sound. Several other ambassadors from predator species lineages shifted, a low rumble of approval echoing his sentiment. They speak of protecting some supposed, pre-sapient life form they detected on one of the system's planetoids. Grathel sneered. A convenient excuse, a shield of sentimentality to hide their greed. Let me be clear. The Cathar do not recognize this claim. We will begin mining and colonization operations within one standard month. If any Terran vessels are found within the Veil, they will be considered trespassers. And the Cathar have a simple, effective policy for dealing with trespassers. He slammed a massive, clawed fist onto the dais. The metallic surface boomed and the entire platform trembled. This is not a negotiation. It is a notification. Withdraw your pathetic claim or your little ships will be turned into scrap. He sat back down, a smug look on his grotesque face. The threat was explicit, a clear violation of Concordat protocols, but he was banking on the fact that no one would dare challenge the Cathar. The chamber was thick with tension. All eyes, all optical sensors, all psychic probes turned to the small, still figure of the human ambassador. This was it. The moment of truth. Would we see the empathetic builder or the silent destroyer? Ambassador Rostova did not rise. She did not raise her voice. She let the silence stretch, letting Grathel's threat hang in the air, festering. She looked at him, her dark eyes unblinking. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, calm, and carried with perfect clarity to every corner of the chamber. It was the voice of a professor giving a lecture. Thank you, Ambassador Grathel, for that candid presentation of the Cathar position, she began, a faint, almost imperceptible irony touching her words. Your perspective is valuable, as it is based on a worldview we have studied with great interest. Grathel snorted. Studied? You think your books can teach you about power, human? Rostova offered a small, thin smile. It did not reach her eyes. Oh, not books, Ambassador. History, specifically our own. You see, your confidence, your aggression, your reliance on physical dominance and overt threats, it is all very familiar to us. You are a classic apex predator. Your species evolved at the very top of your planet's food chain. You were the strongest, the fastest, the most fearsome creature in your environment. For millions of years, nothing could challenge you. Your entire culture, your psychology, your very biology is built upon the unshakable certainty that you are the hunter, and all others are the prey. She paused, letting that sink in. Grathel's smug expression began to falter, replaced by a flicker of confusion. This was not the frightened rebuttal he had expected. We appreciate this perspective, Rostova continued, her tone still unnervingly placid, because it is the exact opposite of our own. Humanity did not evolve at the top of our food chain. Forgive the brief biology lesson, Ambassador, but it is critical to your understanding of the situation. Skin, which I had fought to keep a neutral silver, began to crawl with an involuntary pattern of shifting, curious teal. Every being in the chamber was utterly captivated. For millions of years, Rostova said, her voice dropping slightly, becoming more intimate, more chilling, we were prey, we were small, we were soft. We had no natural armor, no claws, no venom. We were not particularly strong or fast. We lived in a world filled with things that were all of those things. Creatures with teeth longer than your manipulators and claws that could disembowel us with a single swipe. We spent our nights huddled in caves, listening to the screams of our kin being dragged off into the darkness to be eaten. Our cradle was fear. The night was our classroom. Survival was our only curriculum. A profound stillness fell over the grand chamber. The hum of the life support system seemed to fade away. Grathel was no longer lounging. He was sitting bolt upright, his reptilian eyes wide, fixed on her. The hunter was listening to a story from the hunted, and for the first time he seemed to be truly hearing it. We did not survive by becoming stronger or faster, Rostova went on, her gaze never leaving Grathel. The beasts of our world would always be stronger and faster. We survived by becoming smarter, more cooperative, more patient. We learned to see patterns the predators could not. We learned to use tools. We learned to set traps. We learned to work together, to sacrifice for the good of the tribe, to drive the thing from the dark back not with brute strength, but with fire and sharpened sticks, and a terrifying, desperate cunning born of generations of being hunted. She leaned forward, placing her hands flat on the dais. The movement was slow, deliberate. And here is the most important lesson we learned, Ambassador Grathel, the one that is etched into the very core of our being. We learned that the only way to deal with a predator that will not leave you alone, that will not be reasoned with, that threatens your children and your future, is to exterminate it. The word hung in the silent air. Exterminate, it was not a word used in diplomacy. It was a word of utter, absolute finality. You see, Rostova's voice was now barely a whisper, yet it seemed to scream in the silence. When we are threatened, we do not roar. We do not posture. We do not make displays of dominance. That is the behavior of a predator trying to scare off a rival. We are not rivals. When we perceive a genuine, existential threat, we do what our ancestors did to the cave lions and the saber-toothed cats. We study it. We learn its habits, its weaknesses, its biology, its migratory patterns. We learn where it sleeps, what it eats, how it raises its young. And then, when we are fully prepared, we begin a quiet, systematic, and utterly relentless campaign to eradicate it from our environment. Not for dominance, Ambassador, for peace. The deep, lasting peace that comes when a threat is no longer simply defeated but gone. She finally broke eye contact with Grathel and looked around the chamber, her gaze sweeping over me, over every other ambassador present. You have threatened our ships, Ambassador Grathel. You have threatened our people. This has moved our interaction out of the realm of diplomacy and into the realm of threat assessment. As of this moment, your dominion is no longer being considered a political rival. It is being considered a potential predator, and we have already begun our study. She looked back at Grathel, whose chitinous skin had taken on a pale, sickly green hue. He was trembling, not with rage, but with a primal, ancestral fear he had likely never felt before. The fear of the prey. Fleet disposition is a matter of public record, Rostova stated, her voice as calm and factual as if she were reading a grocery list. The genetic code of your species was sequenced by our xenobiologists from the tissue samples you provided for entry to the spire. We have identified 3 distinct proteins in your cellular structure that are uniquely vulnerable to a custom-designed viral agent. Our topolinguists are analyzing your language, looking for the resonant frequencies that can induce neurological distress. Your supply lines cross 2 nebulae that are notoriously difficult to navigate without advanced sensor equipment we can easily disrupt. Your homeworld star is a variable G-type, prone to coronal mass ejections which, if amplified even slightly by a precisely targeted gravitic pulse, could disable every unshielded electronic system on your planet's surface. We know where you sleep. She fell silent. The entire chamber, a sphere filled with the most powerful beings in the galaxy, was utterly, completely, terrifyingly quiet. The weight of that silence was heavier than a dying star. Grathel opened his mouth to speak, but only a dry, rasping sound came out. The blustering, arrogant warlord was gone. In his place was a creature that had just looked over a cliff edge and seen an abyss of cold, patient, analytical lethality staring back. He had come to the chamber to posture and threaten, to act the part of the biggest predator. He had just discovered that he had been growling at a species that had perfected the art of making predators extinct. Ambassador Eva Rostova simply folded her hands and leaned back in her chair. Her expression was once again calm, unreadable. The lecture was over. The Terran Alliance, she said, her voice returning to a normal diplomatic volume, maintains its claim on the Seraphina Veil to ensure the protection of the presapient life within. We trust the Concordat will now see the wisdom in ratifying it. We are, after all, a very reasonable people. The paradox was solved. The conflicting stories I had heard all snapped into a single, terrifyingly coherent picture. They were inspiring innovators because cooperation was their primary survival tool. They were empathetic saviors because they remembered what it felt to be helpless. And they were silent, ruthless warriors because when all else failed, when the predator was at the door, they had learned that the only sure path to survival was the complete and utter removal of the threat. They were not predators. They were something far, far more dangerous. They were the prey that had won. The aftermath of the confrontation was as swift as it was silent. The Concordat arbiter, its telepathic voice now tinged with something akin to awe, immediately moved to a vote. The human claim to the Serafina Veil was ratified with unanimous consent. Not a single voice was raised in opposition. Ambassador Grathel of the Cathar did not even register a vote. He remained frozen in his chair, his massive frame seeming to have shrunk. Within the hour, we received a notification that he had been recalled by the Cathar Dominion in disgrace. His political career, and perhaps more, was over. He had not been defeated in a battle of fleets. He had been dismantled, piece by a handful of carefully chosen words in a quiet room. I left the grand chamber feeling as if the very laws of physics had been rewritten. The spire, once a symbol of ordered, logical diplomacy, now felt like a fragile stage where ancient, primal dramas were being played out. My mind replayed Ambassador Rostova's speech, her calm, measured tone that delivered a threat of such totality it dwarfed any Cathar roar. "We know where you sleep." It was the ultimate nightmare of the prey, turned into the ultimate weapon of the survivor. I sought out Ambassador Illum of the Lumini again a few days later. Her chamber of darkness felt less like a place of philosophical contemplation and more like a refuge. Her light pulsed with a slow, somber rhythm. "You witnessed it then," her bell-like voice chimed, though the tone was flatter than before. "The resolution of the paradox." "Believe so?" I said, my skin a shifting pattern of mottled purple, the color of profound uncertainty. "It is much to process. My people have no concept for this. We have no predators. We have no history of being hunted." "Are fortunate," Illum replied. "We Lumini had predators in the primordial gas clouds from which we coalesced, formless, dark energy things that fed on our light. We escaped them by achieving coherence, by becoming too bright to consume. But we remember the fear. What I saw in that chamber was that ancient fear, not as a weakness, but forged into a weapon. The humans did not threaten to fight the Cathar. They threatened to unmake them, to edit them out of existence." "The stories of their empathy, their creativity, are those just a facade?" I asked, the core of my being struggling with this duality. "No, I do not believe so," Illum pulsed thoughtfully. "I believe they are two sides of the same truth. Their capacity for empathy is so profound because they know, intimately, the nature of suffering. They protect the weak because they were once the weak. They build and create with such ferocious passion because they know how easily things can be destroyed. They love life because they have lived so close to death. Their compassion is as real as their ruthlessness. One is the reason for the other. They are the galaxy's ultimate immune system." Her final words sent a shiver through my form. An immune system. A force that, when faced with a pathogen, does not negotiate. It identifies, isolates, and destroys. It was a terrifyingly apt metaphor. I even dared to speak with a low-level Cathar functionary I knew, a reptilian named Kavas who was packing his disgraced ambassador's effects. He was skittish, his scent glands emitting a constant, low-level musk of anxiety. We misunderstood," he hissed, refusing to meet my optical sensors. "We saw soft flesh and assumed weakness. We heard their talk of rights and compassion and thought it was a negotiating tactic. We are a people of the hunt. The kill is a ritual of strength, of honor. It is loud. It is proud. We roar to challenge our foe." He paused, stacking data chips into a container with trembling claws. "The human," she did not speak of a challenge. She spoke of pest control. "It is not an honorable death to be poisoned in your den. It is not a warrior's end to have your world's sun turned against you. We know how to fight warriors. We do not know how to fight exterminators." His words confirmed my deepest fears. The Cathar, for all their bluster and might, were fundamentally simpler. They operated on a level the humans had transcended out of sheer necessity millions of years ago. The Cathar played a game of galactic chess, posturing over pieces and board position. The humans, when pushed, simply flipped the board over, analyzed the molecular structure of the pieces, and calculated the most efficient way to dissolve them. That evening, I began my first comprehensive report to the Signian Compact. My predecessor Lyra's words about caution and hope echoed in my mind. How could I explain this to my people? A species for whom the concept of a predator was an abstract, biological curiosity. How could I convey the nature of a creature forged in the crucible of fear? I sat before my console, my three-fingered hands poised over the holographic interface. I looked out the viewport of my quarters. The spire glittered against the velvet black of space, a beacon of supposed order and reason. Beyond it, the stardusted arm of the galaxy swept away into infinity. Somewhere in that glittering expanse was a small, unremarkable yellow star. And around it, a pale blue dot, the homeworld of the prey that had learned to hunt nightmares. My report began not with a summary of the territorial dispute or an analysis of economic implications. It began with a story of a small, soft creature huddling in a cave, listening to the screams in the dark. To the elders of the Signian Compact, I began to type, my skin shimmering with the colors of a dawning realization. Subject: a re-evaluation of Terran anthropology and its implications for compact foreign policy. I write to you today not as a diplomat, but as a student who has just received his first and most important lesson. We have for decades attempted to classify humanity using our own metrics. We have judged their art, their science, their philosophy. We have labeled them illogical, paradoxical, and chaotic. We have been looking at them through the wrong lens. To understand humanity, you must first understand fear. Not the intellectual concept of risk, but the soul-deep, genetic terror of being prey. This is the foundational element of their civilization. It is the engine of their innovation, the wellspring of their compassion, and the source of a ruthlessness so profound that it beggars our imagination. They are not conquerors in the Cathar mold. They do not seek dominion for its own sake. Their primary drive appears to be the establishment of a state they call security. It is a concept we have translated as safety or stability, but these words are inadequate. The human concept of security is absolute. It is the silencing of the scream in the dark, forever. Their response to Ambassador Grathel was not a threat of war. A war is a conflict between two opposing forces. What Ambassador Rostova proposed was not a conflict. It was a solution, a final, permanent solution to a problem. Therefore, my recommendations are as follows. We must engage with humanity. We must be their partners, their friends. We must show them that we are not a threat, that our intentions are harmonious, that we pose no danger to their children or their future. We must be so open, so transparent, and so genuinely peaceful that we never, ever trigger their ancestral survival instincts. Because if we ever do, they will not declare war on us. They will not fight us. They will simply study us, learn from us, and then, one day, we will quietly and efficiently cease to be a problem. They are the children of paradox, yes. They are builders and destroyers, healers and killers. But this is not a contradiction. It is a survival strategy. They are the kindest, most empathetic, most helpful species you could ever hope to meet. Right up until the moment they decide you are a monster. And then they become the thing that monsters have nightmares about. I paused, rereading my words. The conclusion was still open-ended, the future uncertain. Were they the saviors of the galaxy, a force that would protect the meek from the mighty? Or were they a latent cataclysm, a biological failsafe whose cure for the disease of predation was more terrifying than the disease itself? I did not know. I looked out at the stars again. The galaxy seemed quieter now, more dangerous. The silence between the stars was no longer empty. It was filled with the weight of 1 billion years of screams and the steely resolve of the species that had learned to silence them. My duty was clear, not to fear them but to understand them, and to ensure my people never, ever gave them a reason to look our way and see something predatory hiding in the dark. The weight of that responsibility was immense, but it was nothing compared to the weight of the silence they could command.